Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and start now. So let me first introduce myself. So I am Trevor Ferguson, the chair of the National Committee on Non-Communicable Diseases and director of the Epidemiology Research Unit at the University of the West Indies. Let me recognize the presence of our distinguished panelists and other members from the Ministry of Health and Wellness, including Dr. Nicola Skyers, Director of Disease Prevention and Control in the Non-Communicable Disease and Injuries Prevention Unit of the Ministry of Health and Wellness. Also, let me recognize Professor Elizabeth Ward, our keynote speaker and chairperson of the Violence Prevention Alliance. We also recognize Mrs. Shauna Trowers, the subcommittee chair for the Violence and Injury Prevention for the Non-Communicable Disease Committee, Dr. Deanna Ashley, who is a co-chair of the subcommittee, as well as the executive director for the Violence Prevention Alliance. Our panelists, Dr. Kevin Goldburn and Professor Susan Walker. To all our distinguished guests, to all our attendees, welcome to this very special webinar on the effects of violence and its relation to NCDs. Now, the World Health Organization reports that unintentional injuries and violence cause over 4.4 million deaths each year and constitute approximately 8% of all deaths. In the age group 5 to 29 years, violence and injuries, specifically road traffic accidents, homicides, and suicide, account for 3 of the top 5 leading causes of death. And taken together, violence and injuries are responsible for over 10% of all years lived with disability. In Jamaica, violence and injuries is the leading cause of death among men and among the top 10 causes of death among women. For example, in 2017, violence and injuries caused over 1,800 deaths among men and 367 deaths among women, together accounting for 11.4% of all deaths. Given these statistics, violence and injuries constitute a major public health problem and places a massive burden on national economies due to the high cost of healthcare, high costs related to law enforcement, loss of productivity, and grave emotional distress. Recent studies have shown that violence has detrimental effects on the neurological system, cardiovascular system, cardiovascular system, as well as immune function. Additionally, high-risk behaviors, including smoking, harmful use of alcohol, drug use, unsafe sexual practices, are more common among victims of violence, further contributing to ill health and premature mortality. An important finding is that persons maltreated during childhood are more likely to be involved in interpersonal violence as they grow up and are more likely to also attempt suicide. Now, the Violence and Injuries Prevention Subcommittee of the National Committee on Non-Communicable Diseases has, as part of its mandate, the promotion of a whole of government, whole of society, and integrated response to violence and injury prevention, and to assist in the mobilization of resources through advocacy to support violence and injury prevention. This webinar is part of this effort to fulfill this mandate. In this public forum, we will hear from Professor Elizabeth Ward, one of the leading researchers and a practitioner in the field of violence and injuries prevention, looking at the link between violence and non-communicable diseases. We will then have a panel discussion in which we will hear from Professor Ward, as well as other leaders in the field, Professor Susan Walker and Dr. Kevin Goldburn. This will be followed by an open session where we will have questions and answers from the general audience. We expect that this forum will be able to identify strategies that can be developed and implemented to reduce violence and injuries in Jamaica, and of course, result in significant improvement in our public health system. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Ms. Shauna Trowers, the chair of the Subcommittee for Violence and Injury Prevention for the National Committee on Non-Communicable Diseases, to give her remarks.
Are you hearing me now? Thank you, Professor Ferguson, for that. I don't know if you really need any remarks after you did such an eloquent welcome. I could just say ditto, ditto, ditto. So I'll just be very brief. It is my pleasure to be here this afternoon with all these esteemed panelists. I look forward to Dr. Ward's presentation. And why that is important, as could you hold for sorry about that. Why is this important? Much like the NCDs, violence is a public health issue. We know this because the causation and the effects of violence are far-reaching, much like our non-communicable diseases. What I think is important that this seminar will do is provide a link between two of the major public health issues that Jamaica is now facing. And myself and Dr. Ashley, who has had the privilege of sitting on this subcommittee, know more than anyone else. Dr. Ashley, from our years of work and since my baptism into M&S, I have recognized you don't know until you know. And it is important that the conversations that persons have on the veranda and think that the problem isn't complex is informed by persons who actually know. And this is what this webinar will start to do. Have a real conversation on the complexity of violence, which is the base of crime, and how exactly we can treat with this.
It's connected to them and I'm not hearing anything through them.
We're hearing you, Ms. Pinhas. And so I just want to welcome us. I look forward to hearing the presentations by Professor Ward as well as the esteemed panelists. And let us hope we have some robust conversations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Trowers. And at this time, I will ask Dr. Ashley to introduce Professor Ward, and afterwards we will hear from Professor Ward in giving the keynote address.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Professor Ferguson, and welcome to everybody. As I introduce Professor Ward, who I've known for a very, very long time, I'd summarize her in saying that she's a committed public health specialist that believes in applying the public health approach, an evidence-based approach to dealing with health problems and any health condition. And violence and the NCDs are, as you heard, two of our big public health problems. She started life in health, her career and professional life in health as a nutritionist way back in the end of the 70s into the early 80s, and was a nutritionist for in the Kingston, St. Andrew and St. Thomas parishes. After that, after working in health for a while, she moved on and decided she should become a doctor. So she went and did her medical degree, came back to work with the Ministry of Health under Professor Figaro, who was working, and she worked with him on HIV, AIDS, and STIs. Subsequent to that, she then went overseas to do her public health and epidemiology training at the London School of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene. It was we set up the Health Promotion and Protection Division in the end of the 90s, and she became the director for the disease prevention and control area, and was responsible for the chronic disease and injuries in particular. So she has a long history of being involved in both chronic disease and in injuries and violence. During her time there, she set up the Jamaica Injury Surveillance System. And then after about a decade or a little over a decade, she decided to step outside of the ministry and focus on prevention of violence. Done a lot of research in this area and worked both locally and internationally. So she has a wide experience. She chairs the Violence Prevention Alliance. She's professor of health services in the Faculty of Medical Sciences, and she's currently technical advisor and consultant to the Citizen Security Plan and Citizen Security Secretariat that is at the ministry, the program that's implemented through the Ministry of National Security. So that's Professor Ward in a nutshell. I could talk longer and many more hours on her, but I'll hand her over to you now.
Thank you very much, Diana and Prof. Ferguson. Really glad to be here and to be able to present to the group on work that I think is really critical for the future of our country. And understanding when we have big problems, when you understand them and can see how to address them more systematically, I think we make more progress. And let's hope we're on that road and continue that way. So this evening, I really have the pleasure to talk to you about crime and violence, putting it forward as one of the main root causes of chronic non-communicable diseases in Jamaica. Chronic diseases, as you all know, is a very serious problem. And, 30% of our Jamaicans over 15 are obese, 12% are diabetic, 34% are hypertensive, according to JNC 7. All of these things, and all the complications of it are a major, major burden on but the main thing is that they're preventable, and injuries is one of the things that needs to be prevented to help stem this epidemic. So what exactly is this root? And there are many other areas that we could look at, but this is the injuries, the violence-related injuries are one of the major roots. Violence in Jamaica is a big problem. Our homicide rate is 7 times the global average. That was in 2020. Our homicides in 2021 increased by 5%. We know that violence is highly concentrated in certain geographical areas, and that many people and many children in particular have high exposure to the violence and the trauma that goes with it. The drivers of violence are very diverse, organized crime, gangs, but very importantly, they're the social norms. And what we see more and more that's driving the epidemic is the lack of community and family protective factors. So what we know now, and the studies that have been done on adverse childhood experiences, is that violence affects the children, and if we don't intervene, especially when they have 4 or more of these adverse experiences of violence, you're going to see a whole set of increases in the non-communicable disease. So you're going to see twice as much heart disease. You're going to see 2.2 times as much alcohol use. You're going to see almost 3 times smoking. And it goes on and on with increasing that. And then it increases the risk of communicable diseases and risk behaviors that again put us at risk. And STDs and HIVs are increased in this population exposed to violence. Maternal and child health, there are increased problems there. And in mental health in particular, as Dr. Prof. Ferguson was saying, you see up to 12 times the risk of suicide in children who have been exposed to violence. General depression and anxiety is 4 times as much. And really worrying to us as epidemiologists and focusing on violence is that the children exposed to violence are 7.5 times more likely to become a victim of violence or a perpetrator of the violence. These studies are sort of put under ambit. It's called adverse childhood experiences. And we have to see that they're costly and they're destructive to our populations. So that any child, as we said, that has 4 or more of these adverse experiences has an increased odds of chronic diseases. So as I said, 1.5 for obesity and diabetes, twice as much for heart disease, 2.3 times for cancer, 2.8 times for smoking and alcohol abuse, 4 times as much for depression, and 7.5 times as much for the perpetration or becoming a victim of violence. And Mark Bellis and them have done, all the meta-analysis and systematic reviews that have been pulled together and reinforced over and over that this is really costly and destructible. But what we also know, it's largely preventable. So when we're talking about adverse childhood experiences, we kind of put them into 3 categories: abuse, neglect, and household challenges. So the abuse that the children or young people face is often can be physical, it can be emotional, and it can be sexual. The neglect can be physical, but it can also be emotional. And then there are the household challenges. If you have mental illness in the house, it's an adverse experience. If you have intimate partner, man-woman business, as they will always talk about, in the house, that intimate partner violence puts the children at severe risk. Parental separation or divorce, migration, mothers leave to go and make a better life they think for their children in another country, leaving them behind. When there's incarceration of a family member, and when there's substance dependence and substance use in the household. All of these are adverse childhood experiences. And once you experience 4 or more, you're likely to increase the odds of all the chronic non-communicable diseases. So what exactly happens in the brain when we are experiencing violence? First of all, the amygdala is activated in the brain. It's our alarm system, our fire alarm system. And then it goes to the hippocampus in the brain, which is like a search engine. And then the search engine, if it's working well and doing well, goes to alert the prefrontal cortex, where you have, when it's working and in tune, it will regulate and put in place what we call executive functioning. And you make reasoned, balanced decisions and don't respond in an adverse way to the violence to which you've been exposed. So once the amygdala in the brain, that fire alarm is set off, and then it gets to the hippocampus. There are basically 3 ways that the outcomes that can come about. You can get it going to the periapital gray matter of the brain, and then to the cerebellum, which controls movement, and they freeze. So this is when they're exposed to violence, and they're so terrified that they're just frozen in one place. But the amygdala can also send it to the adrenal medulla, and this is where you would get epinephrine let off. And it can also send it through the anterior pituitary, and it goes to the adrenal cortex. And this is where you get cortisol release. Now, once you get cortisol released, and you are going to get aggression, you're going to get, you can get the flight where you run away. So you run away from the violence that is there. But very often, and we can see that in Jamaica, there's a lot of cortisol circulating. People get into fights. And once that pathway is activated, it's very difficult. But there is another pathway that we want the hypothalamus to direct the response to exposure to violence through the posterior pituitary. And this allows for a hormone, which is called oxytocin, which is an affiliate hormone. The name for the oxytocin, another name for the effect of the oxytocin really is grandmother love. So if you get the amygdala going through the adrenal cortex and you get cortisol released, what that toxic stress, especially when it's repetitive and becomes toxic, of violence, it can trigger potentially permanent damage. And the cortisol actually can affect the immune function. So when we're seeing changes in the incidence of chronic non-communicable diseases, this is one of the ways. When your immune system is depressed because of the effect of the cortisol, you can see the reason why we would see increased incidence of NCDs. Also, what can happen with cortisol is that you can get epigenetic changes. So you can actually get changes in the genes of individuals that in response to stress. And we see over time, and we've seen it in the when you take brain scans in children that have been chronically or adolescents chronically exposed to violence, there are actual brain changes in the anatomy and function. And this is why we want to prevent this toxic stress and this activation of cortisol in our young and adolescent population. So what really is happening is that when your brain is developing as you get older, and when you're about 5 years old, there's a lot of gray matter. And as you get older, you get more and more white matter. And the important part about the white matter, which is blue is that is your prefrontal cortex, where you make reasoned decisions and you think about your actions and know what the consequences of what you're doing are doing. So what you see is that between the ages of 5 and say 10, 15, that prefrontal cortex, that brake, that steering mechanism, that response is not fully developed, and they don't really understand the consequences of what they're exposed to and how to react and what will be the consequences of how they react. So we have to protect them during this period of development. So the thing is really that trauma really can fray the threads, but we can, and when it does that, the brain shuts down. the thinking brain just shuts down. The age, though in trauma, there's no hope. They're only dealing with the present danger. They don't look ahead. They don't think there's anything else but what's in front of them. They have no regulation or self-control. It's impulse without being able to deal. It's just the cortisol bringing out the fight or the adrenaline bringing out the flight. Efficacy, they just don't know. They're just reacting. They don't know how to control the situations they're in. They don't know how to control themselves from responding. They have no sense of attachment. They're lonely. They're acting alone. When they're in toxic stress, there's nothing helping them, nothing they're holding on to. The learning shuts down. And I mean, I think we're seeing some of this right now in our education system, that when there's a lot of trauma, the learning has shut down, and they're not developing the skill mastery that we're expecting. Social connectiveness is alone. They're just all alone. There's nobody with them. And the trauma is just taking the violence, and the trauma is taking over their lives. But we know that we can control these ACEs, and we can turn this picture around, and we can see differences. So what exactly can we do? And as basic public health things is, we can prevent it before it occurs. We can treat it, or we can put in rehabilitation, or suffer the long-term outcomes. So in terms of prevention before it occurs, if we know where the violence is, and we target and document what the risk factors are, and seeing, mothers being absent in the homes with a lot of violence, etc., exposure to violence and weapons. If you know what the risk factors are, and you know what the protective factors are, you can focus on strengthening the protective factors, family stability, keeping them occupied. Develop programs and policies that target the social and economic determinants of violence. If it occurs, you can treat it. You can treat the actual physical abuse, the sexual abuse, the emotional abuse, the neglect, the exposure, and even self-harm. But the main thing is that you have to try and prevent it reoccurring. And then the other part of rehabilitation is to prevent impairment. I see a guy coming into KPH limping, blood running down his jeans. He's just been shot through his leg. Now, will that man land up with a chronic orthopedic disability, unable to walk and carry out work for the rest of his life? But you want to prevent these long-term outcomes. If you're doing something about it, though, you must be using evidence-based interventions. One of the big things that we have to do, and this is why we know that prevention can work, is that we can ensure that when there is stresses going to the amygdala, that it goes to the hypothalamus and it goes to the posterior pituitary, and that oxytocin, that grandmother love, is released. So oxytocin is called the affiliate hormone, and we call these affiliate structures and pathways, it's as I said, from the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex. So it's a direct line to where the regulation of behavior is, and building that prefrontal cortex. And it causes a behavior, synchrony in behavior between the caregiver and the child. So this grandmother love, the caregiver and the child's relationship, or the adolescent relationship, somebody to care for them, is going to really be the thing that's going to prevent them from harm and from behaviors that we do not want to see violent behaviors and also the consequences, the other consequences of other diseases. So once you have this oxytocin in place and it's there and that child caregiver relationship is there, you change, all of a sudden the threads change. The young person is thinking and has a learning brain. They're hopeful, they're optimistic, they're faithful. They regulate their behavior. So if they're exposed to stress, they know how to put in self-control. They have self-efficacy. They know about themselves and their self-esteem. They are secure. They have attachment to people and social connectedness, and they develop skill mastery. They learn. They're the kids that and young people that learn and go ahead. They have resilience. So they're just 4 things, if you can't remember all the threads, but they need reassurance of safety. All our youth need routine and they need regulation, but most important, they need relationships, and the relationships have to be there for the longer term. As Kim Scott Fisher says, you know, you have to have somebody to watch your back. Next, sorry. Anyway, talking quickly, maybe I'm running out of time, Dr. Ferguson.
We're doing okay so far. Go right ahead.
Okay, sorry, I thought that was a note to me. Anyway, one of the things that we found that really can be an intervention that's affordable, that's accessible, and can really help with dealing with trauma is drumming. And if you asked me about this a couple of years ago, I would have said, you must be joking. But anyway, drumming, we've really looked into it and seen now that it enhances well-being, it boosts your cardiovascular system, it increases your energy, it improves your blood circulation, it helps to burn calories, it neutralizes stress, it lowers blood pressure, and it relieves depression, anxiety, even suicidal ideation, and that has been improved. Next. So really where recently there's been a big study that has come out of King's College that has confirmed what we've seen for a long time on the impact of the drumming on the brain and how it can affect behavior. So what they did was they took young people, they were about 17 years old, they put them into case and control. The cases were the people that got the drum tuition. They got 2 lessons a week over 8 weeks, and they were compared to a control group matched in age and gender, but not receiving the drum. They did fMRI, which is functional magnetic resonance. And what they found in the results was that there was, in that period after the end of the 8 weeks, there was an increase in functional brain capacity. There was an increase in the areas, especially where inhibitory control activities are, and where actions of and outcomes and self-monitoring and self-regulation are active in that part of the brain. So it improves cognition and well-being of both well people and people who are ill. But this is actually to show you after the 8 weeks what they actually saw, the areas of changes in the brain after the therapy was done. So what it is that rhythm-based musical training, it enhances higher order cognition and motor control. It's beat synchronization. I think it even affects, as you say, affects the heart rate, and it's an approach to developing all the different neurological processes that help us with self-regulation and effective functioning skills. So this is out of King's College, and Maria Stephanie Carter, and they used it as well to look at the impact of the behavior on autistic children. And in that population as well, they saw a significant improvement in reduction in the autistic behavior and uptake of normal activities. So the behavior change was there. Next. So we've been doing it, and we did this with children's home, and this is us with caregivers from the children's home. And they put it this way, we did it in 6 homes. They asked us to do it in 6 more, and now they want to do it in 9 more. Very slow on getting the data, and probably need a lot of help if we're going to have to do that. But the reports of improvement in behavior, and now it's 3 hours every week for the children in the children's home who were, especially during the lockdown in COVID, they were so excited about having their drumming and their behavior improve. These are the caregivers, and they work together brilliantly. Violence Prevention Alliance, we asked children on Peace Day to write a letter about how we could sustain communities for a peaceful country. So there were different age groups, but this was the younger age group. I suppose her mother helped. Their world. My name is Abigail, and I'm 5 years old. Let us bring peace to our world where we can run and play as little children do. We need to be kind, honest, and loving. When we do or say something wrong, let us say we are sorry. Please calm our little minds and our worlds, and help us to sustain communities for a peaceful country. My peace, I live with you. Love, Abigail. So as you heard, the government has a all-of-government approach to trying to control violence, and CTD Trowers is in the Ministry of National Security and key in there, and the Citizen Security Secretariat. And we're working with all the government agencies. It has 4 major outcomes, and it's crime and violence reduction, human and community development, you could go back, sorry, safer spaces, and there is a component for coordination, monitoring, and oversight. But what is really important, and you hear about prevention, this and that, stories back and forth. But when you want prevention to work, it can work, but you have to have some things. You have to have the right design and fidelity. So in other words, what's the evidence that says this design of this intervention is going to work? And the fidelity is that having this, you do it the way it's supposed to be done. Then there's a major issue of targeting and dosage. So you can target high-risk behavior is very important to target. Geographical areas are very important to target. And risk factors that are leading to violence are, but you have to have the right dosage. You have to have the right duration, the intensity of it, and make sure that it's matching the target population. Along the way, you have to monitor what you're doing, evaluate it, and learn. We often talk about monitoring and evaluation, but do we forget the learning? And are we willing to change along the way if we find it's not working out as well? You have to have the finance and the technical capacity. It costs a lot. And one of the biggest challenges I think we have in prevention, when you prevent something, who is costing the benefit of that prevention? So you say you spent money, but there is no costing of the benefits of the impact of prevention that was created. So the other important thing that is you have to engage the community. If you are trying to reach and to change behavior, you have to have the community that you're targeting fully involved and part of your intervention. So there's one of the things I think we could look at within your subcommittees is how does what you're doing for cardiovascular improvement and increased exercise and the benefit of increased exercise, how could that help with violence prevention? Well, this is cardiovascular Jamaica Moves activities. For it to work for violence, to help with violence prevention, it'll help anyway. But what you really need is to have communities with safe, clean, green spaces with supervised activities, so that you need lights at night so that you can get young people off the road and they're not there to get involved and have nothing to do. So I'll tell you the story about Angela Brown. Angela Brown lived in Rosetown, and Angela Brown walked for peace. And also it turned out that she walked for exercise. When you go to Rosetown, there's Lower Rosetown and Upper Rosetown, and people don't cross the borders. But Angela decided, after a lot of work was done with the community and the Rosetown Benevolent Society, she walked from Lower to Upper Rosetown, crossing the borders, and that started and brokered the peace in the community that lasted for years. It's not so good now again, but these things have to be renewed. But what she said to me, which really stuck with me, was, Doc, when there's peace in the community, I walk every morning from Rosetown to Emancipation Park, 2.2 miles, and then she walks in the park. She says, I feel so much better. So this is Angela in the long blue skirt. You know, her diabetes got better, her hypertension went down, and her stress went down, and the violence in the community was down. But you see, when there's a lot of flare-up of violence, the children don't go out to play. There are no community football games. People don't go out to walk, and all of what we're trying to do to prevent and get people moving, Jamaica Moves, is not registering. I think I'm done. But what I leave you with is that we have to figure out how we work better together, how we look at the multiple, the integrated approaches that we can modify to have multiple benefits. But just like when you're trying to pull a net out of the sea, you have to have collaboration, and it's really not easy. I think as well, though, one of the things is we have to think developmentally. If we're going to get wellness, we have to start with nurturing that wellness in childhood and protecting our children from violence, and our adolescents, and especially and our boys, but boys and girls. So it's really about wellness. It's about understanding the childhood origins, and I'm sure Professor Walker Susan will talk more about it. It's about nurturing relations. All of us can do this kind of thing. It's a role of doctors, pediatricians, specialists. It's a role of parents, so critical in all of this. The role of educators, the role of the community, and implementing meaningful, comprehensive public health. And we will see that wellness and a difference in the lives in our communities. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much, Professor Ward. This is certainly, I think, a very, very interesting and informative presentation, and a lot for us to act on. And we certainly can have a lot more discussion about this. I was certainly particularly intrigued about the use of drumming as therapy in terms of trying to reduce the violence in our children. So that's certainly something I think we will probably be able to talk a little bit more about as we go forward. Now there are several questions in the chat. We're going to leave the questions for the end. We should have a full half an hour after the introduction of the panels for question and answers. But I will ask for the panelists if you could also take a look at the question and answers, and you could try to start to answer some of the questions in the interim as we keep the dialogue going. So Professor Ward has really given us a very excellent start. I think that there's a lot to learn and a lot that we'll be able to look at applying in our communities and in various other circles as we try to look at reducing the impact of crime and violence, as well as reducing NCD. So thank you very much, Professor Ward. Let's put our hands together. We'll use your reaction button to give a round of applause for Professor Ward. All right, I can't find my clap hand, but I'll do my physical clap. All right, great. Okay then, so we are going to go on to our next section, which is the panel discussion. And we have two panelists who will join Professor Ward in providing some additional information and to take questions and answers as it relates to violence and injuries and that link between NCDs. And I'll take about a minute or two to introduce our two panelists. Firstly, we have Professor Susan Walker, who is Professor of Nutrition and heads the Child Development Research Group at the Caribbean Institute of Health Research at the University of the West Indies. This group works on intervention to promote children's cognitive and social emotional development, has been critical in driving global attention to the importance of responsive interactions and early learning opportunities for children under 3 years old. Recent work includes evaluation of parenting programs feasible at scale in 3 Caribbean countries, as well as a 30-year follow-up of the Jamaica Supplementation and Stimulation Trial, which showed benefits from a home visit simulation intervention for adults' income, education, mental health, and the development and evaluation of training packages called Reach Up, which is an early childhood parenting program based on the Jamaica Home Visiting Interaction. Reach Up has now been implemented in 18 countries, and the research group is collaborating with the Ministry of Health and Wellness in implementing the program nationally. Professor Walker has also been lead author in the highly influential Lancet series and will be able to share with us some of the work that is being done by her team. Let me go on to introduce Dr. Goulburn. So Dr. Kevin Goulburn is a consultant psychiatrist and the director of mental health and substance abuse services in the Ministry of Health and Wellness. Dr. Goulburn is a graduate of the University of the West Indies, where he obtained his MBBS degree and later completed the Doctor of Medicine program in psychiatry. He also completed a Herbert Humphrey Fellowship with studies in drug abuse and health service management at the Virginia Commonwealth University, and has done presentations at several local and international conferences and was involved in a pilot drug treatment program in Jamaica, which sought to combine drug abuse treatment with judicial oversight. He is currently the director of the Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services in the Ministry of Health and Wellness and a board member of the Patricia House. He is also a past chair of the National Council of Drug Abuse. So what we will do here is that we will have short presentations by each of the additional panelists. So we'll start with Professor Walker, and then we'll hear from Dr. Goulburn. Then we will go into the open question and answer section. So over to you, Professor Walker.
Thank you, Prof. Ferguson, and thanks for inviting me to participate this evening. My remarks are going to be mainly focused on prevention and use prevention using available early childhood interventions. Is it not moving forward? No. I'm sorry, it doesn't seem to be moving forward. I'm not sure why.
So click on the screen, that probably often helps.
Okay. Thank you. So early interventions with parents and other caregivers has been shown to be effective in helping caregivers to promote children's social emotional development in areas such as secure attachment, self-esteem, and social skills. It can reduce the violence towards children from caregivers, and also improves their children's cognitive and language development. And our work in Jamaica has shown that these benefits in early childhood have lead to long-term gains for IQ, education, and mental health in adulthood. And we've also shown a reduction in violent behavior in young adulthood. So I'm going to talk about 2 interventions developed in Jamaica, which are tested, effective, and designed to be delivered through existing services. And both interventions are in initial phases of scaling. So starting with the Jamaica Home Visiting Intervention, this intervention was developed in the 1970s, and the aim was to improve parent-child interaction. So these responsive interactions that we know are so important for children's social emotional development, and to increase parents' ability to use play to promote their child's development. The intervention has a strong evidence base built over many years, showing the benefits for child development. It's also been demonstrated to be feasible for integration with services, and importantly has been replicated in several countries. In Jamaica, the program is delivered by community health aides who conduct an interactive play session with mother and child to build her ability to promote development. In addition to the immediate benefits of the intervention in childhood, we have shown important adult benefits. So we have followed children who received the intervention through to adulthood. And what we found is there were benefits for their IQ and for their educational achievement, their mental health through reduced depressive symptoms. They had better social skills and reduction in violent behavior, as well as higher wages. We then followed them again 10 years later and saw the benefits for IQ, depression, and income were maintained. And we found some additional interesting benefits to what can sometimes be called character skills, in that they had more grit or perseverance with tasks, and they were more conscientious. They also had reduced drug and alcohol use. So as the evidence for the Jamaica Home Visit Intervention increased, we had increasing demands from persons in other countries for support in implementing. So in 2014, we used the evidence from the Jamaica Home Visit Intervention to develop a comprehensive training package, which is known as the Reach Up program, or Reach Up, an early childhood parenting program. And the goal was to make it easier to develop and increase capacity of implementing agencies to deliver effective parenting programs and facilitate scaling of these programs. Reach Up has now been adapted and implemented in 18 countries, ranging from China to India, Zimbabwe, and Peru. In Jamaica, Reach Up is now being implemented through the primary health services as the Ministry of Health and Wellness's early stimulation program, which is led by the Family Health Unit. It was decided to begin the program in phases, and phase 1 was planned in 1 health district per parish. And the reason for this was to ensure that the intervention, the program was effective, and to resolve any challenges before scaling nationally. Phase 1 began in 2019 with home visits by community health aides to at-risk families in the communities they serve. And implementation had started in 6 parishes when it was suspended in March 2020 due to the COVID pandemic. There was a real, particularly within the stresses of COVID, there was a real need to be able to continue with this type of intervention. So we developed a remote delivery approach, which involved a new manual, which we call it the parent manual, which was designed so that parents could use it themselves. It was not something that a community health aide had to bring into the home and introduce. And in place of the visits, we substituted phone calls, and we also sent out weekly text messages to support the activities that were being promoted through the phone calls. This was implemented from September 2020 through to the summer of 2021. And when we evaluated it, we found it benefits for parenting practices. Parents were more engaged in the interactive activities with their child. And also, very important, they used praise much more when their child behaved well. So to support and reinforce good behavior, they used a lot of praise. The program is starting up again and is really starting in this last quarter of 2022, using a blended model where the community health aides are doing 1 visit per month and then a phone call. And we'll be evaluating next year with the support of the IDB. So moving on to another intervention, this one targeting early childhood teachers, is the IRI Classrooms intervention. And the aim of this was to prevent violence towards children by teachers, to help them promote children's social and emotional skills, and to reduce aggression among the children and prevent the early development of antisocial behavior. What the intervention does is provide training to enhance the skills of the teachers in classroom behavior management. And this enables them to create an emotionally supportive environment, promote children's social emotional skills, and use positive behavior management to act proactively to prevent problems and misbehavior. There's again a strong evidence base, and evaluations have shown that for teachers, they had improved classroom management skills, more positive interactions with the children, warmth and promotion of social skills. For the class as a whole, they had improved behavior and interest and enthusiasm in what was going on in class. For those particular children, particularly at risk of conduct problems, we saw improved behavior. Importantly, with follow-up, after the year of the program finished, and we went back a year later, we found that the teachers were continuing to use the methods and thus benefiting the classroom environment and children's behavior. Very excitingly, when we followed children from the participant schools into grade 1, they had better school achievement, better school attendance, and you'll have heard Elizabeth talk a lot about self-regulation. They had better self-regulation skills. The companion program to the IRI classroom is the IRI Homes intervention. This, as you might think, targets parents, and the goal is to build positive parenting skills and reduce families' use of violence. It's designed as small group sessions with parents of children attending the school, and usually done either early in the morning or at the end of school when they come to pick up their children. In the initial round of the intervention was delivered by our team, but with the involvement of the teachers. And the goal is to have the teachers eventually take over the sessions and be responsible for the sessions. It's delivered as an 8-week intervention, so it's one session per week, and the content's delivered using very interactive methods. And the first evaluation of the IRI homes has shown that the intervention reduced parents' use of violence against their child, increased parent involvement with the child. And for those children, again, the children who were most at risk, who had behavior difficulties at baseline, for those children, it reduced conduct problems. Again, with this intervention and this team, we're collaborating and moving to integrate with existing services. So there's been substantial collaboration with the Early Childhood Commission and the Ministry of Education and Youth. For example, a one-day teacher training in behavior management was developed for the Ministry of Education, delivered now not for teachers in school, in basic school, but for teachers of children in the early primary grades who also really need this support. The Early Childhood Commission has adopted the IRI Toolbox as the national training program in behavior management for early childhood practitioners. And again, in response to COVID and in collaboration with the World Bank, the team developed a virtual version of the IRI homes in which ECC field officers were trained to implement the program. An evaluation showed reduction in parents' use of violence against children and also their attitudes towards violence against children. So from this, I think if we think about what we know, we know that we have effective Jamaican developed interventions feasible for delivery through existing services. The interventions to build parents' skills benefits children's development and can have lasting gains in adulthood. And these gains are likely to contribute to adult success and well-being. Intervention with early childhood teachers can improve teacher behavior, their classroom management skills, and the classroom environment. And it also reduces child aggression and promotes child social skills. So moving forward, we really need to make these programs part of services for children and families. The interventions are in initial stages of being scaled by the Ministry of Health and Wellness for Reach Up and the Early Childhood Commission for the IRI Classroom. And we need to commit the resources to expand them and to expand them. Elizabeth spoke about monitoring, evaluation, and learning, but also to expand them in a way that we maintain adequate quality. We've also developed another intervention that is designed to be delivered at child health clinics. This Baby Matters program uses videos, demonstration, and practice. And in 2023, we plan to extend the content. We have support to extend the content, and we're going to introduce modules around nutrition and around positive behavior management. And then later in 2023, we'll be training Ministry of Health and Wellness trainers to then go on and train community health aides. The interventions need extending to interventions for other caregivers, such as in daycare. And what we need to strive towards is to have all children have a strong early childhood foundation from which they can benefit more from other opportunities, school, and all the other programs, and lead to adult well-being and success. Thank you. And I should just say, oops, it stopped sharing. Oh, never mind, it's okay.
Okay, so thank you very much, Professor Walker. And again, very interesting, lots of studies that we can use and opportunities to implement. And we can talk a little bit more about that as we get further into the panel discussion. Let me now take the introductory remarks by Dr. Kevin Goldburn before we go into the question and answer session. Dr. Goldburn.
Thank you, Professor Ferguson, for your kind words of introduction, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of this panel discussion, a very important topic that we need to really explore and see how we can indeed advance the well-being of our country by focusing on reducing violence in our country. Let's bring up a slide. But most of what I'm going to say is really, Dr. Waters said it before, so I will skip over some of my slides to go to what may be a little bit different, coming from my perspective, being a psychiatrist. So as you heard, the effects of violence affects one's brain, hippocampus, amygdala, prefrontal cortex, impairs stress response, it causes excessive activation of fear circuitry, as Dr. Waters mentioned, impair our normal brain and reasoning development. And importantly, we need to realize the plasticity of the brain, which means the flexibility of the brain, decreases over time. So early intervention is key for trauma-impacted individuals. And we mentioned about the adverse child experiences, and we see where some abuse of child, neglect of child, and also trauma within the child's also environment. And the effect of those trauma are varied. So some may cause a difficulty in controlling their anger and rage, which of course can lead to violence, may cause persons have hallucinations where they have impaired perceptions, they may have depression, other mental disorders, panic reactions, severe anxiety, they may have other anxiety conditions like post-traumatic stress disorders, they may have a lot of somatic symptoms, because we need to understand that mind and body is connected. Sometimes persons presented with bodily symptoms, but it's really because emotionally they're not well, and it is more projected as body issues and not mind issues, sleeping issues and other issues. Important to also recognize that due to this exposure to trauma, then you may have health risk behaviors, which I mentioned before: smoking, increasing eating wrong food, getting obese, decreased physical activity, multiple sex partners, original trauma, and self-injury. Also, you must bear in mind that there are long-term consequences, which may be physical diseases like ischemic heart disease, cancer, lung disease, liver disease, and other disease and disability. And also, you must not forget there may be serious social problems as a result of persons having unaddressed trauma, maybe resulting in homelessness, prostitution, delinquency, violence, criminal activities, inability to gain or sustain employment, re-victimization. They have a difficulty in becoming a parent, and they have alteration in their own self-perception. So from my perspective, primary prevention of violence, as I mentioned before, you have to increase the protective factors and reduce the risk factors. And these factors, as we know, span various ministries, departments, and agencies, and they need input from all sectors and not just Ministry of Health and Wellness and Security. So from a psychiatric standpoint, we recognize that mental illness, when it's untreated, can lead to violent behavior. And also substance use disorder, untreated, also can lead to violent behavior. So it's important for us of early detection and effective treatment of these conditions. And part of what we're trying to do now is try to integrate mental health treatment within our primary care system. As you know, our primary care system is where first contact with a lot of persons and the public health system. So if we can get persons trained, the general practitioners, the nurse practitioners, in how to diagnose and begin early treatment for persons with mental illness and substance use disorder, then we can prevent and also associate violence, which may be seen in persons who are untreated. Having said that, we must bear in mind that persons who are mentally ill are not usually violent, but there are some who may become violent if they are untreated. Also, we need to look at universal health coverage to ensure it includes treatment of mental ill and substance use disorder. And this not only include medication, but also insurance coverage to ensure they can get the best treatment available. An important part of prevention of violence from my standpoint also improving the mental literacy and the emotional intelligence of the population. Right now, we are working on a program within the school called School Mental Literacy. We should increase the mental awareness of the school population, increase their promotion of mental wellness, their decreased stigma towards mental illness, and to know how to recognize signs of mental illness, and to improve their willingness to seek help. And then emotional intelligence is important because it helps us to be aware of one's emotions and to be able to control emotions, and also be aware of other person's emotions and to know how to respond in a way that will not cause the person to become more aggravated, but to ensure to have a positive social interaction. And then importantly, we need to have provision of trauma-informed care to at-risk persons. And at-risk persons, as you have heard before, what are risk factors? Those persons need to have trauma-informed care. And for those persons who are in institutions like place of safety and children's home, need to have this trauma-informed care, which help persons to get over the trauma through a process. And these caregivers can be trained to deliver this trauma-informed care. And by doing so, person get a corrective emotional experience in getting over their past trauma and be able to readjust and establish new relationships and be able to become productive and not be prone to violence. So my recommendation to the committee then is to ensure we enhance our public education to help the general public, and specifically for those who provide care and educate children and youth. And this can be done by helping persons recognize the reality of trauma and its negative impact on NCDs, including mental health, helping to recognize signs of negative impact of trauma and violence, which includes fear, attachment issues, trust issues, helplessness, and insecurity. And also helping to be able to respond to trauma by providing trauma-informed care. And then we take some training, and we actually have some training done for persons who work in place of safety, and that need to be enhanced. And then, of course, we have to have the public, and especially those persons who take care of persons who are in places of safety and other institutions, to ensure they resist the tendency to re-traumatize persons. And I said before, we need to have all hands on deck. And I want to close with this slide by saying that really and truly, for us to really tackle the violence problem, we need to have positive relationships, because healing occurs in these positive relationships. And the relationship will promote safety, the trust which would have been destroyed during past experiences, embrace diversity, provide holistic care, respect human rights, pursue person's strength, communicate with compassion, understand the prevalence and impact of trauma. So healing happens in positive relationships. Thank you for your attention. That's my opening remarks.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Goldburn. So we will now go into our question and answer session. Just a few, let's call it housekeeping announcements. So you can type your questions in the chat and we will take those. I'll try to go in order. And also, if you would like to ask a question verbally, if you raise your hand, the host should be able to give you permission to speak. Before we go to the questions in the chat, though, I wanted just to throw a couple questions at our panelists as we try to put some of this into perspectives. And even looking in the chat, I see one or two questions sort of related to what I have here. So one of the first things that I would ask each panelist just to give me your perspective in less than 1 minute what do you consider to be the root causes of interpersonal violence? Now, are these related to learned behaviors handed on from one generation to the other? Is this primarily related to psychosocial stress? So, of course, we want to get to the issue of primary prevention. So, what are these root causes and how, well, yeah, we'll take that first. So, just a minute each. I will start with Professor Ward.
Violence is complicated, and it's not really easy to say. You can't say it's one thing alone. There are a lot of social, cultural exposure to violence. There's a lot of learning and copycat behavior, and this is the way you respond. But there's also a lot of, in a culture, man for man, and you must show your strength, and different. You're not to cry. Men are not to cry. Different things. So there are many. Those are many parts of it. It's psychosocial, and then but you have the environment. Learn what's on social media, what's in exposure. And very important, as Susan asked and both Kevin, what happens in your home? If you have that strong, loving, resilient set of factors in your lives, you can make it through all of the turmoil that you live in.
Okay, good. Thank you. Professor Walker.
There we go. Well, it's almost an impossible question because as Elizabeth said, there's so many different things. I mean, I could just focus perhaps on the home and how important those early years are in developing, being security, knowing that someone is there for you, that that you're loved, that when you do something wrong, people kind of just help to guide you into how to do it, and don't respond with that. Their response is not violent towards you. You're not experiencing, so the violence against children is a major contributor to later violence. So I think the home, and whether it's a supportive home or not a supportive home, is probably one of the main grounding variables. But then obviously, and I guess Dr. Goldberg will talk more about that. What happens after that is also then building on the foundation.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Goldberg.
Yes, so I have to agree with the 12 panelists on their comments, and just to add that from my experience, I think a lot of it has to do with the experience of communication, because you find that, for example, ladies will have a different way of communicating from men. So you find that sometimes, because of the fact men do not know how to express themselves so much, they sometimes react by violent means. Whereas ladies will more express themselves, know how to get their emotions out. They're not pent up emotionally charged, unlike men, for example. So I think there's a gender difference, which also is fueled by the culture that we live in, the social culture we live in, where men are not supposed to cry, men are supposed to be man up and to be very strong. So I think it's a mixture of social cultural factors, which of course is passed on from one generation to the other, as persons raised in a home and see how the mother behaves and how the father behaves, you learn behavior from that too.
Okay, so that's very interesting. And of course, we'll have to look at how can we reverse some of those patterns and teach new approaches so that some of these cultural norms that are quote unquote violence producers do not continue to be passed on from one generation to the other. Professor Walker, you mentioned something about the whole issue of the reaction when a child does something wrong. What are your thoughts on corporal punishment in the home setting? How much does this contribute to the challenges we have with violence?
I don't think we can quantify that, but I mean, we do know that violence against children is a trauma for them, and Elizabeth went through the what are considered to be the ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and physical punishment, as well as not just physical punishment, but denigrating the child, but emotional punishment, is going to affect the child's self-esteem, their attachment, their sense of safety, and all of those things which go on to make them more vulnerable when confronted with all the later traumas or later difficulties, makes them more vulnerable to respond with violence.
Okay, quite interesting. And in your presentation, you also mentioned the importance of praise. And interestingly, I was listening to a recording when I was coming down, and I think the speaker said that persons hear that you can't do things about 1,700 times between the time you from a childhood to adulthood, compared to about 1,500. Well, 17,000 rather, compared to about 1,500 to say that you can. How important is praise and positive reinforcement in trying to mitigate against violence in our communities?
I think it's tremendously important. And I think one of the things is, we tell parents not to do certain things, but we have to give them alternatives. We have to encourage them that there are positive ways that they can get their children to behave well, and kind of looking out for good behavior is one of the best. I mean, so whenever the child does some good, to praise them for it, and praise them in a way that we call labeled praise, in that you praise them and let them know what it is they did that was good, what you're praising them for. And it's a real learning experience, and it makes children like that. It makes them want to behave well again. So whatever you give attention to, children will do more of it. So if every time they do something wrong, you just make a big deal of that and go on about that, it's a way they did get attention. And so it's, I think what we need, I think rather than is, as we try to persuade people to move away from corporal punishment, we have to be providing them with skills and alternatives and how they can behave in a way that just makes children want to behave well. Okay,
very good. So we will practice labeled praise.
Absolutely.
All right, good. Thank you very much. Let me ask Professor Ward, and is there a relationship between hunger or food security and violent behaviors? Most of us have heard the sort of saying, a hungry man is an angry man. Right. So, well, how does this relate
maybe
to
you should
violence?
have asked Susan that question more. I will also defer to her. But once you're hungry and you're hypoglycemic and your basic needs are not met, and you are in a very stressful situation, you try to remediate. How are you going to respond? And it's also very distressing on a mother that does not have enough to feed 4 children or 5 children and not know where the next meal or is coming from. So we do also see children acting out, but also that what we know is that when children go to school and they only have a bag juice and cheese tricks, and they're falling asleep by 10 o'clock. So they might get to school, they might be dressed already to go, but they can't learn because they just don't have that energy, and their basic needs are not being met. So, all of this, but Susan.
No, Elizabeth, you answered that perfectly. I don't have anything to add.
All right, good. I'm trying to manage the time, but I don't want to rush us too much. So I'll ask folks to forgive me if we're trying not to go over too much. But I do want to ask Dr. Goldburn another question, and this is the whole issue of mental illness and risk associated with violent behavior. There's probably a lot of misconception, but there are lots of fears. So for example, I think just last night on the news, there was a story of woman who was beheaded or had her throat slashed by her own son, who was reported to be mentally ill. Are there ways in which we can prevent violent behaviors among persons with mental illnesses? What are the best approaches that one would need to look at?
Yes, thank you for that question, Professor Ferguson. Yes, the main approach we have to do is make sure we have effective treatment. Because once you have effective treatment, persons who are mentally ill will not be prone to violence. Actually, they may actually become victims of violence sometimes, being teased by persons on the road and so on. But usually those persons who may resort to violence are persons who are seriously mentally ill and are untreated. Then they may act upon some of their hallucinations, for example. They may respond to that, where voices tell them to do things. But otherwise, the main way to prevent that is to really adequately treatment. And as I mentioned in my presentation about universal health coverage, to ensure persons who are mentally ill can access adequate insurance coverage, can access job and other opportunities that everybody else will access to improve their quality of life. When they don't have that, they become a burden to society. Family members don't want to have them at home. They become on the fringe of society, become homeless, and they enter into issues including violence.
Okay, so we definitely have to ensure that persons with mental illness do get appropriate treatment. All right, that's very, very important. All right, I'm going to segue now into the questions that are in the question and answer section, but just to prime the panelists, I'm going to come back to you and ask for each person to give a response. So, and this will be your sort of a closing remarks after we've taken these questions. And this question really speaks to, if you were to make one recommendation for policies or programs to reduce violent behaviors in Jamaica, what would those recommend, or what would that recommendation be and why? So that will be your closing remarks. And we'll take that after we've gone through the questions from the in the question and answer. And just to say again, well, let me make sure reopen to ensure that I have all the questions and answers up. If you would like to ask verbally, or you can raise your hand, and we hope you'll be able to. So the first question in the chat comes from Professor Tola Reid, and he asked about a previous intervention that was being done in Jamaica. And I'm not sure, well, any of the panelists can take this. So do you know whether or not there has been any follow-up on the findings from Professor Hicklin's Dreamer World Intervention program in Jamaica? So I'm not sure who would like to take that.
I will
Yeah,
take
go
that.
ahead, Dr. Goldberg.
Yes. So the Dreamer World program has really shown that students, given to our students who were not doing well academically and have behavioral issues. The intervention of creative writing, some of them were doing drumming and other things, that they found persons who were exposed to this, that they're improving the academic performance and the behavior has been improved. Unfortunately, since 2020, since the pandemic, the program has been halted, but hopefully we'll restart it soon.
Okay, so I guess one of the things we'll need to do is to put together shall we say, a listing or some sort of various interventions that have been looked at, and probably at some point in time look at the ones that we want to implement at scale, because certainly there's a number of interventions that have been tried. Okay, so let's go to the next question, and I'm going to ask Ms. O'Mealy and Ms. Melbourne just to assist me. If there are any raised hands, etc., please let me know while I go through the questions in the question and answer section. So this one from anonymous attendee: are the suggested prevention programs targeting individuals or communities? How do we plan to design evidence-based and innovative programs at scale necessary to have the desired impact? So I guess I'll throw this out to the panel again to see who will take this question.
You want me to take? I'll give it a go.
Okay.
I think as well, you do need to target the highest risk individuals to have the greatest impact in the shortest space of time. But those individuals live in go to school, those communities go to work, those communities live in community, those individuals live in communities. So you have to have a supportive environment and set of services to work and make sure that the behavior changes that you want to see in those individuals and in the overall responses, you know, in the communities are continued. So we know what to do. We just have to do it the right, remember, as I said, the targeting, the dosage, and the right intervention for the right length of time to be and involving the community. This is why the community side of it, to continue the work, because we can't be there all the time and we can't keep continuing.
I would just like to add to that I agree with Elizabeth that you have to make sure whatever intervention you put in place, that it is carried by the community members. Because if it's carried by someone from outside, then it lacks sustainability. And of course, if it's carried by community members, then it enhances their skills, their coping skills, and their helping skills.
All right, so that's very important as well. So involving the communities in both the design and implementation would be quite important. Okay, so let me move on to the next question in the chat. So this one is well, I just asked it as it is. So when you say evidence-based, what do you mean? Are there principles of evidence-based, I'd say evidence-based practice to help improve efficacy of programs and interventions? So who wants to tackle this concept of evidence-based based interventions? What do we mean, and what are the principles that govern evidence-based interventions? So Professor Walker, do you want to take that one?
I think what we mean by evidence-based is that it's been tested. So you typically, at the highest level, it would be through a trial, a randomized trial, so that you would have persons who receive the intervention or not. So you're testing whether it works, and you don't know who got which intervention. Got the intervention or not. It is similarly to the way that they evaluate the benefits from new drugs.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is that there's always a lot of prior evidence. So it's important to ground the intervention on knowledge of, so for example, the interventions that I work on, that they're grounded in child development theory and the evidence that we know about what works for children. But then what we have are interventions that are grounded in that, but are adapted and designed to be appropriate for our context. And so I think that's also really important. So it's not just, so we must not try and persuade policymakers and decision makers to adapt interventions because we think they ought to work or we think it sounds good to us. There must be some scientific evidence that they work before we can start to spend money on implementing them. And so that's really what it is. It's about making sure that there is evidence that what you plan to do will probably be effective. And then you have to think about, well, what's the best way to do it with this particular community or this target group, how to reach them and things like that. But you must have supporting evidence that it works.
Okay, excellent. So we don't just do things on whims and fancies. We've got to do it based on tested, tried, and proven. And then, of course, we adapt it to suit our local context. Okay, so let's move on. So what partnerships and collaborations will be required for effective design, implementation, and review of programs and interventions? How can we improve and assure a multidisciplinary approach. So this speaks about partnerships and collaborations and that are necessary for effective design and implementation, and how can we improve and assure this multidisciplinary approach. So who will take that one?
Boy.
Sounds like you, Elizabeth.
I think Shauna is here, and in the citizen security program, one of the big things is to try and get this different agencies, ministries, departments, and agencies to work together in the communities to deliver the best package and to understand the role of each of the different persons. I think we tend to have a lot of vertical programs that we deliver, and they work fairly well, but because they're not integrated, because as Kevin said, they don't have a community base, they don't have a way of being socially and culturally accepted, and easily it can be rolled out and replicable. You heard that thing that Susan said, the important thing is that reach up has been done in 13 countries. That is one of the things that really shows you that it is reproducible, it can be sustained, and that is why we have to get up and move from just doing 6 parishes in 6 communities and making sure that's available on a much wider scale. Anybody that wants to spread the magic of getting intersectoral work done and continued and get everybody to work together, come forward. We're ready to go with you.
All right, excellent. So we, as we say, it's a whole of society, whole of government, all hands on deck. We want to ensure that it's a really multidisciplinary approach and everyone is affected. So it's really in all our best interest. Next question asks, beyond finance and resources, what are some of the other important enabling factors that will support effectiveness of programs and interventions? Who will take that one? So Dr. Goldburn, we can take you now. Ensure everybody gets a chance to speak.
He's muted.
Dr. Goldburn?
Yes, okay, yes. Right. Sorry about that, yes. But what is needed on the buy-in from the heads of ministry department agencies, in terms of the top brass being agreeing with the policy decision being made, and also for everybody to see where their own ministry and department agency will benefit from the intervention. So it demands a convincing and helping person to realize that what is happening, even though you are working in silos and you are getting some results, but when you're working together, 1, you get more results, and 2, it is using limited resources better. A lot of times we can't do as much because we have limited resources, but putting resources together, putting our strengths together can be more effective than when we work separately. So I think a lot of it has to be political will, not just political will in politics, but political will among the workers, where whatever is happening is not my issue alone, but it needs to be a joint approach in order to get the best result for those who we seek to serve.
Okay, and I realize that my questions numbers are getting larger. Thank you. All right, let's see how fast we can go through the others. Professor Ward, I'm going to come back to you on this one. Somebody would want to know, could the drumming also cause others to feel rage? So is it a two-edged sword?
That's not the experience that we have had with it. But the drumming, the drumming approach that we're talking about is rhythmical drumming. And it's something that is controlled and it's systematic, and as I said, it's sustained over time. So it's not, it's not done to insight or experience. but within what we have done, and right now we've done quite a fair amount, that has not been any of our experience, but we have done it with people who are experienced and able to understand the process of what we're doing and work with the groups.
Okay, so certainly, so the experience doesn't suggest that. So that's good to hear. All right, so moving on. So the next person would like to know, is violence the root or a manifestation of underlying social, psychological, and biological factors interacting, biological, interacting, and dynamic risk factors?
Wow.
Should targeted interventions target the manifestation or the underlying risk factors? Should interventions target isolated risk or interactions of risk? It's a complex question, but who would like to tackle this one? Yeah, go ahead, Professor Ward.
It definitely is complex, and there always will be some underlying factors and some environmental factors, social factors, biological factors. All of these things come together. What you have to do, I think, is really understand the situation in the context of where you're working. You know, and if you're working in a school, it's not that you're going into a school with solutions. You're going into a school to find out what are the factors, what are the things happening in the community around them, what are the impacts of things on the teachers, what are previous history, and then you apply the evidence base that you know, and work with the teams to build out the program. So, you know, it's really a process of analysis and understanding that when you see a behavior, something caused that behavior. They're not behaving just for behaving sake. There's the A before the B, the antecedent, exposure and experience, and all of these factors that were put very eloquently in the question that results in the behavior. But you have to then understand which are the major drivers, and more importantly, what are the protective factors, the resiliency factors that you can build in the individuals or the group or the community to be able to maintain and build peaceful, healthy relationships and wellness.
I'd like to add to that, I think it's also saying that when you have persons with manifestation, yes, you may have the manifestations of a person behave and hurt someone, for example, they may negate the consequence of that. But at the same time, you also have to look at the underlying risk factors to see if this behavior does happen in vacuum or these underlying risk factors. Because a lot of time we react to the behavior and not realizing that there may be underlying factors, which if you leave them unaddressed, then recurrence of the behavior is very likely.
Okay, so very, very important to take that holistic approach. And well, probably just to throw in my 2 cents worth, one of the things though is that sometimes we have to look at the factors that we can act on, because sometimes some of the factors may be much more difficult to change. So even if it's not the root cause, if we can intervene and produce a better result, then it is still worthwhile. All right, so Dr. Goldburn, I'll probably ask you to take this one as well. So mention was made of trauma care in places of safety. What about correctional institutions?
Yes, definitely. I want to mention places of safety, but that's correct, because in correctional institutions, you may have persons who may be there because of behavioral problems, but they have underlying traumatic experiences which may have caused this violent behavior, cause them to end up in correctional institutions. So in those facilities, yes, trauma-informed care will help that person not to just go through, for example, a sentencing and come out the same way, but would have been gone through what I call a corrective emotional experience, that he or she will be rehabilitated. So when they leave from the institution, they would have leave with a better understanding of themselves and better able to control themselves, and hopefully will be fit to come back into society.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So the questions are still adding up, but we're going to try to close off shortly. So I'll take a few more. Hopefully we don't have to leave any questions unanswered, but just a warning that we are running out of time. I'll ask Professor Walker to take the next question. This is from Dr. Earl Wright. What is the role of teaching parenting to prevent adverse childhood events, and who and where to teach parenting? Is the timing of each intervention important in using brain development and plasticity of the brain? So, well, Prof. Walker, you can lead and the others can chip in that as well.
Well, we know that the brain is developing fastest in early childhood. But I mean, as Elizabeth showed, then there's as the brain is also maturing through childhood and adolescence to have complete adult functioning. So the point is that you start early, you support parents early, so that they can do the things to lay the foundation in early childhood. But you don't think that because you've done that in early childhood, everything is over. You have to have, it's a life course approach, so that it's not that only one time. Early childhood is critical because that's when the brain is developing very rapidly. But then you need to have support for parents to guide children. How do they become involved with their child's school? Who's reaching out and engaging parents so they feel welcome when they take their child to school and don't get greeted with, "Oh, your child was troublesome today," or something like that. So I think, making sure that we continue to engage parents and support parents appropriately for each stage of the child's development, but definitely starting early and starting in early childhood.
And then in terms of who and where to teach parenting?
Sorry?
Who and where
to teach parenting?
Whoever is reaching those parents. And we've worked a lot with the Ministry of Health through the primary health service, because they read that's the service that's most reaching children under 2. And also because we worked with community health aides, because they're very, very good at developing relationships with families. And it's who is not so important as how the person approaches the family, and that they take the time to build an effective and empathetic relationship. And then it's possible to then interact over time in a way that can help the parent to build skills.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I'm going to try to put the next 2 questions together from Michelle Harrison. It says, this is going a bit further on Dr. Goldburn's point. What about the role of messaging and language used? How can we describe young men versus young women? And how do we develop interventions? Well, the other one is, well, let's take that first, because the other one goes back a bit to parenting. Right. Which we might have addressed already. Go ahead, Dr. Goldburn.
Yes, actually, I think parenting is the answer to that. And it may be difficult though, because a lot of homes are headed by the mother. But in parenting is where some of the start of where the boy is treated different from the girl. And you need to have equal treatment in terms of how we allow both boys and girls to grow up, in terms of their expression of their affection, or you nurture them and you show affection towards them, so they can grow up with the knowledge that they can express themselves, they can have feelings of pain and hurt and express themselves, and they can learn how to express themselves in a way which they can feel comfortable in a home situation. So I think it allows with the socialization in the home setting, and of course in the wider community, to ensure that we have an equal approach towards both men and boys and girls.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And this one, I'll just read a comment from Joan Smith. Many years ago, labeled praise was used in early childhood programs. That made much difference in the entire holistic development. I think this is in the Early Childhood Commission. I hope I got ECC right. All right, so we're coming down towards the end. So the next question, how do we deepen the engagement, ownership, and agency in the design, implementation, monitoring, and improvement of programs and interventions? How do we begin to address the challenge of community resilience? Professor Ward, do you want to take this one?
That's a very big challenge, but working with communities and building, the strengths of positive community leaders and role models are very important. In the old days, we used to have village lawyers and people that would
Village doctors
that people would respect and listen to, and everybody would have an opportunity to get a fair hearing and intervention. I think a lot of disrespect exists within communities, and a lot of people are excluded from benefits, and all of these things bring about a lot of issues within communities. So there are certain areas that we have to control the violence in the communities. We have to have dispute resolution systems. We have to have health and education. We have to have job opportunities. We have to have spirituality and environmental issues. All of these things together can help to build healthy, safe, strong, supportive communities. And we can't leave out people because, they don't look right or they don't dress right, or we have to include and find ways to give people that self-esteem, that resiliency, to let them be excellent at whatever area in their lives they can be. And they're valuable in our society, become valuable in society.
Okay, thank you. So the last question, and I'll ask any of the panelists to take this. Based on your experience in violence reduction, what role, if any, does religion or spirituality play?
I think it plays a role in terms of how people react to situation and circumstances. I mean, for example, one thing that spirituality tells you about is forgiveness. And so if someone hurts you, the idea is not for you to go eye for an eye and tooth for tooth, but going to forgive the other person. So I think spirituality will help us to be more tolerant of situations, circumstances which can be stressful, can be tension, could cause a lot of conflict, and help with the resolution of those situations.
Okay, so thank you very much. So let's go. I did say that we were going to ask the panelists to give less than 1 minute response to this last question. So if you were to make one recommendation for a policy or program to reduce violent behaviors in Jamaica, what would that recommendation be? And you could say why, but the answer must be in less than a minute. So we'll go in reverse.
I'll start.
I was going to go in reverse order, but yeah, let's
go in reverse order.
Yes, so Dr. Goldberg, you start.
Okay. So I think one way one policy I would think about is the policy as to how we deal with persons who maybe have a history of violent behavior, to make sure that we don't just address the manifested behavior, but try so we can get a person to gain insight into their behavior and gain a new way of approaching situation and circumstances. We want to have them rehabilitative. So we want to have a policy where it allows for kind of rehabilitation. I want to talk about restorative justice, restorative behavior.
Okay, very good. So rehabilitation and restoration. Thank you. Professor Walker.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure I agree with a question about one recommendation for something as complex, which needs so many different things. But I will go for making sure that we have strong programs to support parents so that they can raise their children to, as Elizabeth says, to be resilient, to have the grounding and the foundation through the interactions, love, praise, to be resilient, and children who have the skills, both cognitive and social, to make the most out of going into school and the other opportunities they'll get during life.
Okay, thank you very much. And Professor Ward, you have the final say.
I would say we need to keep all our children in schools, and it's schools where we're providing, making sure that all the children are literate, especially our boys, and we have a huge education deficit right now that we're facing. But the psychosocial component is there, the after-school effective supervision is there, and the parenting involvement and community engagement. So we have that catalyst that we can bring and keep our children in a safe environment and achieve what we want
Okay,
for all our
excellent.
children and the country.
Thank you very much. I really want to thank our panelists. This has been a very excellent discussion. We've gone a little bit over, so I will not say very much more. Let me ask Dr. Ashley to come on in at this time, and she will do the summation. And after her, Mrs. Nancy Pinchas will give our closing remarks and vote of thanks. So Dr. Ashley, then Mrs. Pinchas.
Okay. Thank you very much, and thanks to the panel for this really interesting, informative presentation. And I'm going to really do a very, very tight summary. And I think the session is recorded, so we'll try and circulate the recording. But just to summarize the presentation that Elizabeth did was help to understand the pathways in the brain and how the brain matures and is affected by adverse childhood experiences and chronic toxic stress that leads to impact on behavior, cognitive development, and poor health conditions related to many related to the chronic non-communicable diseases. So that I think that set the scientific base on which to build our thoughts on intervention. And so intervention, because of how the brain develops and the critical period of development of the brain in the early years, the importance of interventions that would help the development of the brain, to maximize the development of the brain, should start early in childhood, and this would help the development of the prefrontal cortex and the positive resilience, self-regulatory capacity of the child through into adolescent and adulthood. And so prevention, therefore, should focus on the early years. And this, in fact, was brought out in the presentation that Professor Walker did, and Susan clearly elaborated the benefits of, which is based on scientific evidence, based on strong randomized controlled trials, and follow up over now 32 years, and showing the positive effects that has had that long-lasting benefit from those early intervention, early stimulation program that was started and implemented during the first 2 years of life. And it's scalable, adaptable to other environments. And we, in fact, the initiative in Jamaica has started, but needs some enhancement and scale up. The model of it was interesting to see how the model of a blend of home visiting with telephone support will work. We look forward to seeing that model and its evaluation. The other thing that came out of Dr. Ward's presentation was the importance and how to link interventions that benefit the individual behavior, enhance physical activity and well-being and healthy lifestyle, and how it is linked to preventing violence within different settings. The importance and benefits of drumming, I think has been shown in control trials to be effective, and we've seen the benefits in different settings in Jamaica. So the importance, I think, that came out of the presentation there was the importance, and it was reiterated and borne out by Professor Walker's presentation, was the importance of being a good design based on a sound scientific evidence, staying true to the design, but adapting it to the environment and setting that you're working in. The importance of targeting and having the right dose, the right duration was critical. The importance of monitoring, evaluation, and learning, developing capacity, understanding the financial and technical elements and cost benefit analyses that underpin the intervention, and the importance of community engagement. I think that came through in all the presentations, and as I think also as we both in terms of the questions and the presentations, the other point of importance is at the school level, interventions at the school level, and again improving the relationships between the teacher, management of the children, and classroom management, and the importance of ongoing interaction with parents as the child develops through the early childhood school system into the primary school system. In terms of the issue of mental health, I think was the negative impact of trauma, alcohol, and other negative effects of violence on an individual's emotional and mental health, I think was again reestablished by Dr. Goldburn, and the importance of again understanding the protective factors and the risk factors and how to build resiliency was re-emphasized. He spoke about the improving the mental health literacy and emotional intelligence, which was critical in ensuring good mental health, as well as integration of mental health into the overall healthcare services to facilitate early detection and treatment of mental illness. And the other important thing was the importance of provision of trauma-informed care for at-risk persons in places of safety, children's home, in correctional facilities, basically to reduce, to improve and enhance the treatment, detection and treatment and rehabilitation of such persons and reduce the risk of recidivism. I think in summing up, in terms of the policies, there's much more could be said, but I think the importance of dealing with persons who have violent behaviors and allowing and ensuring rehabilitation was an important point in relation to policy. Again, the strong programs for parents to build resiliency in our children, and the importance of keeping children in schools and working with in the school environment to enhance the behavior and socialization of children, not included within the school, and structured activities with supervision after school to keep children engaged. I think that in a nutshell is what I think were the essential takeaways. And there are a lot of things that food for thought. How do we deal with all of this within the context of your task force at the NCD level within the subcommittee? We still don't have a real formula for how to collaborate effectively, but that's going to be remain a challenge. But we cannot continue to work in silos. We have to work across the within sections of a ministry, or within the sections of between intra and inter agency and departments of government and ministries. But we also have, and there will be no success if we don't work with the community and engage and listen to the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ashley. And over to you, Mrs. Pinchas.
Thank you very much, everybody. I just wanted to say this is it was a good experience for me to listen to, major players and people who really have their boots on the ground, so to speak, in dealing with this very important matter. And not only is it important, but I think we know what the problems are, and it's clear we have some, we'd have some long-term programs that are evidence-based, they've worked. And I think what, as Dr. Ashley said, really needs to happen is this collaboration with civil society, including community service organizations, government of Jamaica that has some great programs that are ongoing, overseas development agencies and other private entities to provide the well-needed resources to see the work continue, and also to kind of ensure that we're maximizing and efficiently using what little resources we do have available to us. So just to close, I wanted to say thank you very much to our moderator, Professor Trevor Ferguson, the chair of the National Committee on the NCDs, who kept us all in line, focused, and as best as he possibly could on time. Also, just thank you to the key panelists, Professor Susan Walker and Dr. Kevin Goldberg, who really got down into the nitty-gritty meat of the matter, because we're dealing with people, not just numbers or problems. These are individuals, and I thought they did a fantastic job of articulating what the problems are and who the problems are and how do you relate to them and solve them. And Professor Elizabeth Ward, who gave the keynote address and set the tone for everybody as we, launched into the conversation and discussion. And, the background, the work that's been done by Dr. Ashley, the co-chair, and of course, Shauna Trowers, who's the chair of the Violence and Injury Prevention Subcommittee of the NCDs. This was really a great presentation. And last but not least, I wanted to say thank you to the Ministry of Health and Wellness, who made the Zoom room available. They also provided design and printing services for the promotional materials. So again, thank you. Underscoring again their commitment to this critical matter of how we deal with crime and violence prevention at its very root. So thank you all very much, and good night.
Okay, so thank you, everyone. This has been a fantastic session, and we look forward to seeing you in another webinar sometime soon. And of course,
I've lost
we
my
will
volume. I
take
can't
this.
hear you.
Okay, all right.
All right, good. I guess we can stop the recording.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
All right, good.
All right.